Okay, yesterday we talked about Yame Christle, and today what we're going to look at is her complaint against the LAPD. Now, I don't know if you remember, but some months back I was trolled by somebody. One of the LAPD people sent me a text message, what have you, and sent me to this article, and it was a Michael Berkow like spoof article, and they wanted me to run with it, and they were gonna trying to suck me into some bullshit. Well, Michael Berkow is the defendant in this complaint by Yame Crystal at the LAPD. And she was sexually harassed by him, and he created a hostile work environment for her. And we really need to look at what she did. What she did was she compiled all of the information that had been subpoenaed in the Wallace civil trial, and she had logged it into her computer that was on her desk. And Michael Berkow uh, was trying to get her somebody to take her computer off of her desk, which eventually ended up happening. And so we look at Yame Crystal, and in on the I guess it's page 42. If you look at the bottom with the numbers on the page, it shows that Yame Crystal was assigned to Internal Affairs Group in April of 2003. In August of 2005, the Workplace Investigation Unit was formed, and Christle was an investigator and also the timekeeper in WIU. Now, if you remember, Police Chief Bernard Parks was the head of Internal Affairs when the Christopher Wallace murder happened, and Kevin Gaines worked for him in Internal Affairs. And Kevin Gaines was dating Sharitha Knight at the time, and Rafael Perez and David Mack were also hand-picked recruits from Police Chief Bernard Parks. And so we've got kind of a clear title, if you will, going from Internal Affairs all the way through Yame Crystal. And so she knew that police officers were involved in the murder of rapper Christopher Wallace. And so uh, in the early morning hours, Christle observed a female officer leaving the area of the third floor interview room at IAG, followed shortly afterward by Defendant Berkow, who was attired in a white t-shirt and pajama bottoms. Now, what police officer or what chief is wearing a white t-shirt and pajama bottoms while he's working at LAPD? Plaintiff Christle made a misconduct report to the Inspector General on February the 3rd, 2006, and there was an investigation into the matter that found that Defendant Berkow maintained a room in the area of the interview rooms on the third floor of the Bradbury building, which he utilized to sleep in when working at the Professional Standards Bureau. His office is on the second floor, so he's sleeping at LAPD. I mean, that's kind of interesting, right? Now, Berkow told Christle that he had met a female officer when she worked Vice, and that her IA interview with Plaintiff Berkow had given her a ride to the train station, and that Berkow had then drafted the allegations against the female officer who Berkow had given a ride to the station, charging her and a male officer with false and misleading statements to the San Bernardino sheriff. And there was an automobile collision that they were involved in. And Berkow told Yame Crystal not to make the allegations that she engaged in policy and that it be addressed during the criminal trial of the officers. And then that whole thing got swept away. And Yame Crystal said that Olga Villa-Lowe um, was given preferential treatments in exchange for sexual favors. Now, supposedly there was an air mattress there, and that was the big thing, that he was having sex with female officers on some air mattress, which was something that I also heard from insiders about this whole thing. And I heard that Yame Crystal was a stand-up officer that was driven out of LAPD And you may have heard that in yesterday's video. So there was a note on a male officer's desk which said, "If you can get Yame Christle's computer off of her desk, I will give you a week of free lunches." And so that note was reported to Yame Christle's supervisors, and they took no action. They did nothing about that. And then the computer does get taken away, and this computer was a treasure trove of information that showed that LAPD was involved in the murder of rapper Biggie Smalls, aka Notorious B.I.G., also known as Christopher Wallace. And there was a $5 million verdict involving Rampart Scander officers Liddy, Ortiz, and Harper. And LAPD developed a pattern and practice of concealing the evidence that's self-incriminatory and also evidence that concerns the interest of defendant Berkow. And Berkow was believed to be the mastermind behind all of this with the LAPD. So we look at the rest of the complaint, and the information that she was compiling was the basis of the mistrial motion that included facts defendants withheld and concealed important evidence relating the involvement of LAPD officers into the murder of Christopher Wallace. And it's believed at least one detective, Detective Stephen Katz, committed perjury when testifying about the documents that were missing in the case. Now, Stephen Katz was the officer, and that was information leaked by an insider at LAPD to Perry Sanders, who was the lead on the case in the Christopher Wallace civil trial. And he let the judge know that there was an LAPD officer, detective, which was Stephen Katz, that was withholding information in the case. The judge declared a recess. They went over to LAPD. They looked in Stephen Katz's desk drawer, and sure enough, they found all these documents. And by the way, one of those documents included the 80-page report of the criminal activity of Reggie Wright Jr. And we're still looking to see if we can't get a copy of that report. So if anybody has that, we definitely need to find that report. Love to read that report. So if anybody has an inside track on how to get that, please send that over. Now, there was a memorandum for Shalif that went to everybody in LAPD, and it said, "Request for all materials pertaining to the Christopher Wallace homicide investigation." And they were asked to search their entire workspace for all documents, including tapes and photos pertaining to the ongoing investigation of this homicide. And the information was supposed to go to Detective Casey, officer in charge, Operation Transparency, PSB. Now, after this memorandum was issued from the police administration, Shalif, plaintiff, input some of the information received from the officers in response to this memorandum into the computer, and the information received during just one day was more than a foot thick. Plaintiff was asked to type into computer highlights of information, and she did. And it was the involvement by LAPD officers, a Compton gang member, and others into the murder of Mr. Wallace. This information went into a word matrix indexing the new discovery information, and this all happened late summer of 2005, and the information matrix included computer runs, information where people were, and different witnesses to the murder. So defendant City of Los Angeles was under a continuing obligation to produce this discovery, and it's the belief of the defendant that the City of Los Angeles failed to comply with the order from the federal court, and that there was currently discovery underway, and that her computer was then taken in the summer of 2005, and that the information was purged from plaintiff's computer since it included claims of some witnesses that LAPD officers and others were involved in the killing of Mr. Wallace. The information was ordered by the federal court to be turned over to the Wallace family attorneys, which was not so turned over. Thus, the motive and reason to conceal the information and purge plaintiff's computer is to protect the defendant, City of Los Angeles, from having to turn over discovery materials in the Wallace case, which there is a $363 million loss of earnings claim and other damages. And the other damages would have been triple that, because punitive damages, especially with LAPD and the City of Los Angeles concealing this. Now, there were internal affairs investigations in which 2 officers were charged with 17 counts of misconduct, including 4 counts involving the murder of Mr. Wallace and conspiracy to commit that murder. And so all of that information was on Yame Christle's computer and was purged when they took it from her to give to a Caucasian male officer they trusted. So the recovery of the documents at the President Wallace, they keep finding more and more robbery, homicide relative to the case, but the documents that she had on her computer were never found, and many of those documents, including the Reggie Wright Jr. criminal activity report generated by the LAPD, was never turned over to the Wallace plaintiffs in the Wallace civil trial, the second Wallace civil trial. So there was retaliation taken against Christle after she reported Chief Berkow and in the gathering discovery in the Wallace civil case, and she was administratively transferred out of internal affairs. She was demoted to Sergeant 2 from detective. She lost overtime opportunities, lost training opportunities, lost promotional opportunities, and she was no longer able to compete for a promotion to lieutenant because of the demotion. And so she filed a lawsuit, and she was rewarded over $1 million in this lawsuit. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this. Wayman Anderson also refuted the testimony that he gave that Yame Christle had somehow, he had somehow been in touch with her. That was something he was coerced by Don Vincent to say in the case, and he's already come out and refuted that claim. And so I told you before that I asked about Yame Christle, and that I've heard that she is a very, very nice woman, and that she was a great, great LAPD detective, and that she bled blue, and that she did a good job for LAPD, and the LAPD management drove her out of office. Now, when we listened to Gordon Martins, he talked about police, and he said that none of this corruption can exist within a department unless management is aware of it and condones it. And we talked to Matt Perez, who worked for the FBI, and he talked about the drug trafficking and money laundering that went on, and he said that that went all the way up to the Federal Reserve. And so those are other videos that you may want to check out. There are other interviews that I have yet to release that are definitely damning in this case. And I hope this has been enlightening for you. If you guys want to look at the source document, it will be in a link in the notes. And look forward to, producing more of this anyway, more later.